Ethan Cole had been away from home for almost 8 years, and the long road back to his father's ranch felt heavier than he remembered. The sky above Wyoming stretched wide like a quiet ocean of blue. But Ethan didn't feel comfort in its beauty. He felt pressure in his chest, the kind that came from memories he had tried to bury for too long. When he finally reached the property gate, the old wooden sign with the ranch name was half broken, hanging by one rusted nail. The land looked tired, almost abandoned, as if it had spent these years waiting for someone who never returned. He stepped out of his truck and pushed open the gate, and dust rose around his boots. The silence of the place settled over him, broken only by the soft wind brushing through dry grass. The fences were bent in several places, and the barn roof had a long crack running through it. The house windows were still intact, but the paint had faded. Ethan looked around and wondered if he had made a mistake coming back. But debt had cornered him, and selling the ranch was the only way he could hope to regain control of his life. Still, something inside him couldn't ignore the strange tug he felt, like the land was greeting him, or maybe judging him. He told himself that was nonsense. Land doesn't care about people. Land doesn't remember anything. At least, that's what he believed. He spent the first hour walking through the yards, checking the old water tank and the dried-up vegetable patch his father once cared for with great pride. Ethan remembered standing beside him as a boy, learning how to plant seeds while his father spoke about respecting the earth. Back then, Ethan didn't pay attention. He was too busy dreaming about riding horses across miles of open ground. Now those memories came back like soft whispers. As the evening sun dipped toward the horizon, Ethan sat on the porch steps to rest. His muscles ached from the long drive, and he rubbed his hands together, trying to warm them. A faint sound of footsteps broke the quiet. Ethan looked up and saw an elderly native woman walking slowly toward the house. She wore a dark shawl wrapped around her shoulders, and her long gray hair flowed like silver threads in the wind. Her steps were steady, calm, and she carried an air of wisdom that made Ethan sit up straighter. He recognized her at once, Mara, a respected woman from the nearby community. She had been a friend to his father for years. Ethan had seen her a few times in his youth, always from a distance, always feeling slightly intimidated by her quiet presence. She stopped a few feet away from him and nodded politely. Ethan stood and returned the greeting. "You're back," she said, her voice gentle but strong. "Only for a little while," Ethan replied. "I'm planning to fix some things and then sell it." Mara looked around the damaged ranch as if she could see more than he did. Her eyes were steady, almost searching. "Your father loved this place." Ethan nodded, but he didn't say anything. Words felt heavy inside his throat. After a short silence, Mara stepped closer and spoke with a tone that felt like a warning but not a threat. "The land remembers what you forget." Ethan blinked, unsure he heard her correctly. "What does that mean?" "It remembers every step, every choice, every mistake, every act of care," she said. "Memory is not only in the mind. Sometimes it lies in the soil, the wind, the quiet places we think have forgotten us." Ethan shifted uncomfortably. He had no idea what she wanted him to understand. To him, the land was just land, dry dirt, cracked wood, and broken buildings. He gave a small, uneasy laugh. "Maybe, but I'm not sure the land remembers anything about me." Mara gave him a soft, knowing smile. "You left because the past was too loud. But the land is patient. It waits for people to return when they're ready to listen." Her words hit him somewhere deep, but he worked quickly to hide it. "I'm only here to take care of practical things," he said firmly. Mara studied him for a moment, but she didn't argue. "Be careful with how you move forward. Ethan Cole. The land will remind you of what you do not want to see." With that, she turned and walked back down the dusty road, her figure slowly fading into the dim light. Ethan watched her leave, feeling more confused than before. Her message lingered in his mind longer than he wanted. When the sky turned orange and purple, Ethan went inside the house. The air smelled old, like shut windows and memories that never faded. His father's tools still hung on the wall, neatly arranged. A jacket he used to wear, still hung on the back of a chair. For a moment, Ethan imagined his father stepping through the door, calling his name like he used to. But that was impossible now. He placed his bags on the floor and turned on a small lamp. The room filled with soft yellow light, revealing dust floating like tiny stars. Ethan sat on the edge of the old bed and let out a long breath. He tried to convince himself that Mara's words meant nothing, that she spoke in metaphors he didn't need to understand. But when he closed his eyes, something he had tried to forget for years quietly returned: a flash of bright fire, roaring wind, and the smell of burning wood. He saw himself as a teenager, running through smoke with his father shouting behind him. He heard the crackling flames and felt the heat on his skin. The memory came and went in a single heartbeat, but it left him shaken. Ethan opened his eyes quickly. He ran a hand through his hair, trying to calm his thoughts. "It was a long time ago," he whispered to himself. "It's over." But he didn't feel relieved after saying that. Instead, he felt strangely watched, not by a person, but by the land outside, as if it carried traces of that night he never fully faced. He wondered if coming back here was a mistake. Maybe selling the ranch would help him move on once and for all. Maybe the past didn't need to be revisited. Still, he couldn't ignore the uneasy feeling in his chest. Mara's voice repeated in his mind like a quiet echo. "The land remembers what you forget." He lay down but couldn't sleep. Every small sound, the wind against the window, the creak of old wood, felt like a reminder. He remembered how his father used to say that land carries stories, and people have to honor them. At the time, Ethan had rolled his eyes at the idea. Now, he wasn't so sure. He got up again, walked to the window, and looked outside. The moonlight touched the dry fields, making them glow pale silver. The land looked peaceful, almost gentle. Yet something about it made his heart feel heavy. He wondered if the ground still held traces of that terrible fire scars hidden beneath grass and dust. Ethan didn't want to think about that night. He had spent years avoiding the memory. He told himself it wasn't his fault, that nature was unpredictable. But deep inside, a quiet voice whispered doubts he wished he could silence. He told himself to focus on the present. Tomorrow, he would make a list of repairs. Tomorrow, he would plan how to sell the ranch quickly. Tomorrow, he would not think about the past. But tonight, he felt the land watching him, waiting. He closed the curtains and sat on the bed again. His body felt tired, but his mind kept turning. He could not explain why he felt so connected to this place, even after running from it for so long. Something unresolved held him here, something he didn't yet understand. And in the silence of that old house, with the weight of forgotten memories pressing gently on him, Ethan finally whispered into the dark, "What did I forget?" But the land outside gave no answer. Not yet. The next morning, Ethan woke up before the sun. Not because he felt rested, but because the house creaked loudly as if trying to pull him out of sleep. He rubbed his eyes and stepped outside. The cold morning air hit him sharply, making him breathe deeper. The land looked different in the early light. The dry fields stretched far, still covered in a thin layer of silver frost. The barn stood quietly, old but steady, as if waiting for him. Ethan walked across the yard, kicking small stones with his boots as he went. The silence was so complete he could hear his own footsteps echo. He reached the old barn and pushed the door gently. It groaned as it opened, letting out a smell of dust, wood, and faint memories. Sunlight leaked in through cracked boards, forming bright golden lines across the floor. He looked around slowly. Hay was scattered everywhere, even though there hadn't been animals on the ranch for years. Tools lay out of place, as if someone had used them recently. He picked up a rusted hammer and brushed off the dirt. The weight felt familiar in his hand, like an old friend he hadn't spoken to in a long time. As he explored the back corner, Ethan noticed a section of the barn wall charred black. He frowned. He didn't remember the fire reaching this far. The wildfire from years ago had burned the main fields, the outer fence line, and some of the storage shed. But this part of the barn should have been untouched. He touched the burned wood lightly. The marks looked old, older than the fire he remembered. But how could that be? His father never mentioned any fire before the big one. A strange feeling spread through Ethan, like the land was showing him something he had never noticed. He stepped outside and walked further across the ranch, letting his boots follow no path at all. In just a few minutes, he discovered more burn marks, small patches of ground, where the soil was darker, harder, almost shiny. He crouched down and pressed his palm against it. It was cool now, but something about it made his skin tingle. These markings looked like scars the land had carried for a long time. Ethan stood up, puzzled, and continued his walk. Every few yards, another burn mark appeared. Some were small circles. Others were long and thin. It was as if a fire had moved through the land in a strange pattern long ago. A pattern he didn't recognize. He felt uncomfortable, but also curious. Something inside him whispered that these marks were connected to his own past in a way he didn't understand yet. When he returned to the house, Mara was waiting near the porch. She stood calm and steady, her eyes following him as he walked closer. Ethan almost asked her how long she had been there, but he knew she wouldn't answer directly. Mara always had perfect timing, as if she showed up exactly when someone needed her. "You look troubled," she said softly. "I found old burn marks on the property," Ethan replied. "Marks I don't remember. The big wildfire didn't reach the barn. But there are scars everywhere, as if something else burned here before." Mara nodded slowly, not surprised. "The land holds many memories. Some you lived, some you ignored, some your father kept quiet." Ethan felt a small spark of frustration. "Why didn't he tell me about another fire?" "Maybe he had a reason," Mara said. "Maybe the day would come when you needed to discover it yourself." Ethan hated how her words always made him feel small. Not in a bad way, but as if she knew things he could only guess. He wanted clarity, but Mara never spoke in straight lines. He crossed his arms and looked away. "You keep talking like the land is alive." "Not alive like a person," Mara said, "but alive in a different way. It remembers. It teaches. It warns, sometimes gently, sometimes harshly." Ethan didn't know how to respond. He felt foolish for asking questions, but even more foolish for avoiding them. Mara stepped forward and touched one of the porch railings. "Your father once said this place held too many stories for one man alone. That's why he honored it. He didn't ignore its signs." Ethan swallowed. He felt guilt rise inside him again. He had ignored the land for years. He had left it behind like a burden he didn't want to carry. "I came here to fix things and sell it," he said quietly. "I don't need stories. I need money." Mara gave him a long, thoughtful look. "Be careful with quick choices. If you sell without understanding the truth, the land may remind you in ways you cannot avoid." Before Ethan could respond, she turned and walked away down the dirt road, leaving him standing alone. He exhaled, frustrated and confused. Mara's warnings felt dramatic to him, almost unreal, yet a part of him couldn't dismiss them. Trying to shake off the conversation, he went inside the house and decided to start sorting his father's belongings. He opened an old wooden cabinet and found piles of letters, faded photographs, and dusty notebooks. As he moved things one by one, a small metal tin fell from the top shelf and landed near his foot. Ethan picked it up slowly. The tin was old, dented, and had burn marks on its lid. A strange chill passed through him as he turned it over in his hands. Why would something like this be burned? He opened it carefully. Inside were several items that sent a shiver through him. First, a folded map with handwritten notes in his father's neat handwriting. The map showed the ranch, but the paths drawn on it were different from what Ethan remembered. It showed escape routes, gathering points, and areas circled with warnings. He pulled out the next item, a photograph. It was of him and his father standing near the barn, taken a day before the wildfire. Ethan remembered the moment clearly. But the image felt heavier now, sharper, as if the land behind them held secrets he never noticed back then. The final item was a partially burned letter, its edges dark and fragile. Ethan unfolded it carefully. The letter was addressed to him. His father had written it. Ethan's heart beat faster as he read the words. Though the fire had erased many sentences, Ethan, one day you will return. There are things you must understand. The fire was not only nature's doing. I never told you everything. The land, the rest of the line was burned away. Ethan stared at the letter, feeling the room grow quiet around him. What had his father kept from him? What part of the wildfire had he never revealed? His hands trembled slightly as he placed the items back into the tin. He didn't want to believe there was something more to that traumatic night, something hidden. But the letter suggested otherwise. Maybe his father had tried to tell him the truth before the fire took away the chance. As Ethan sat there in silence, the sound of a truck engine approached the ranch. He stepped outside and saw a shiny pickup coming down the road. A man in a clean suit stepped out, wearing dark sunglasses and a polite smile. "Ethan Cole?" the man asked. "I'm Daniel from Northridge Development. We heard the ranch might be going up for sale soon. I'd like to make an offer." Ethan felt the weight of the tin box inside the house. Mara's warning echoed in his mind. "The land remembers what you forget." He forced a calm expression. "I haven't decided anything yet." I. Daniel nodded quickly, as if expecting the answer. "Perfectly fine. But I'll be honest, we're willing to offer immediate cash. No delays. You can walk away from this place today if you want." Ethan looked past the suited man at the fields. The barn. The old fences. The burn scars in the soil. He felt torn between the promise of freedom and the pull of unanswered questions. Daniel handed him a business card. "Think about it. We can close fast." As the truck drove away, Ethan remained standing still, staring at the land as if it were speaking to him. He didn't know it yet, but the land was not finished reminding him of the truth. Ethan couldn't stop thinking about the letter he found. The burned edges, the unfinished sentences, and his father's handwriting all pulled him into memories he thought he had buried for good. After the man from the development company left, Ethan sat on the porch for a long time, watching the sky change from bright afternoon to soft evening. The map, the photo, the strange burn marks on the land, everything connected to one thing he didn't want to look at again. The wildfire from years ago. The fire had taken almost everything. The ranch had barely survived. Ethan had survived. His father had survived with injuries he carried for the rest of his days, and Ethan had spent years blaming the weather, the wind, the dryness, anything except himself. He had built a wall in his mind so high that even he forgot what was behind it. But now, the wall was cracking. That night, Ethan tossed and turned in bed. Every time he closed his eyes, the fire came back in pieces, flashes of orange light, burning brush, the roar of wind feeding the flames, his father shouting something he couldn't remember clearly. It was all blurry, like a dream he remembered only halfway. But he knew the truth was hiding inside those pieces. By early morning, Ethan had given up on sleep. He stepped outside and walked toward the edge of the property, where the wildfire had begun all those years ago. The ground looked normal now, covered with patches of grass, small rocks, and the thin remains of last summer's weeds. But Ethan knew this soil had once glowed with heat. He crouched down, touched the dirt, and closed his eyes. He tried to remember the exact moment the fire started. He saw smoke. He saw flames. And then he saw himself as a teenager, angry about something small and unimportant, annoyed with his father's careful ways. He remembered that his father had told him to wait, that the weather was too dry, that burning old brush piles wasn't safe that week. But Ethan, stubborn and proud, had insisted. He wanted to prove he could handle ranch work. He wanted to feel grown. He wanted to show he wasn't just a boy following orders. The memory returned sharper now. He remembered lighting a small brush pile. He remembered the wind suddenly changing direction. He remembered sparks flying farther than he expected. He remembered trying to stomp them out. He remembered fear, and he remembered his father running toward him, shouting his name louder than he had ever heard. Ethan opened his eyes quickly and stood up. The wind felt colder than before. For years he had told himself the wildfire was not his fault, that nature had caused it. But standing here now, he could no longer hide from the truth. He had started it, not on purpose, not out of harm. But it had been his mistake. His father had known. The letter's burned words made that clear. But his father had never blamed him. He never raised his voice, never spoke of regret. He simply rebuilt, healed, and continued life as if nothing had happened. He protected Ethan from guilt by carrying the burden alone. Ethan felt his chest tighten. He looked out at the fields and felt the years of silence rushing toward him all at once. For the first time, in a long time, he whispered, "I'm sorry, Dad." A dry sound behind him made him turn. Mara stood several feet away, her face calm, her shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders. Ethan didn't know how long she had been there, but he wasn't surprised to see her. She always appeared at moments when the land seemed to ask something of him. "You remembered," she said softly. Ethan didn't try to hide anything. "I caused it. The wildfire. It was my mistake. I never wanted to admit it. Mara stepped closer, her steps slow and steady. "You were young. You did not know the strength of wind or the hunger of fire. No one is born knowing. But I ran away," Ethan said, his voice strained. "I left the ranch. I left my father to deal with everything alone." "You left because your heart was heavy," Mara said. "You carried guilt, even when you told yourself it was gone." Ethan looked down at his hands. "Why didn't my father ever tell me? Why didn't he ever talk about it?" "Because he forgave you the moment it happened," Mara said. "He knew you would remember when the time was right." Ethan felt tears press against his eyes, though he tried to blink them away. The wind moved gently, brushing through the grass. Mara watched him quietly, giving him space. After a while, Ethan asked, "What about the old burn marks on the barn? And the scars on the land? Were there other fires too?" Mara nodded. "Your father faced many fires in his life. Some real, some emotional. The land carries their memory. Not to punish, but to remind you that every person has a story. You only saw one part of his story. There was more you never asked him." Ethan felt a deep ache inside. He wished he could go back, talk to his father, ask questions he never asked, listen instead of rushing through life. But time doesn't go backwards. It only waits for people to face what they have avoided. He walked slowly toward the barn with Mara beside him. When they reached the charred corner, Ethan touched the dark wood again. "I didn't know this was burned." "Your father rebuilt many times," Mara said. "He believed in starting again. He didn't fear scars, he saw them as lessons." Ethan let that sink in. He had always believed scars meant failure. But maybe scars meant strength. Maybe scars meant survival. Mara looked at him with gentle eyes. "You think of leaving, selling the ranch, letting everything go. But tell me, Ethan, will selling the land erase what you feel? Or will it follow you wherever you go?" Ethan didn't answer. He knew the truth. Selling wouldn't erase anything. It would only push the truth farther away again. He walked back toward the house with a heavy heart but clearer eyes. The letter weighed on his mind. He unfolded it again inside the kitchen, staring at the ruined sentences. His father had tried to explain something before the fire destroyed the chance. The unfinished message felt like a hand reaching out from the past. Ethan took a deep breath and sat at the table. His father never blamed him. Mara said the land didn't punish, it reminded. Maybe it was time for him to stop running. As the day passed, Ethan found himself pacing inside the house, feeling restless. He opened drawers, sorted old tools, wiped dust from shelves. His mind kept drifting back to that moment when the wind changed direction years ago. He wondered if his father had known it would happen, or if he had been just as surprised. He wondered how his father felt seeing flames move faster than they could outrun. He wondered why he hadn't asked sooner. Near sunset, Ethan stepped outside and looked at the horizon. The golden light made the ranch look peaceful, almost untouched by the past. But he knew better. The land was full of memories. His father had left pieces of himself here, and now Ethan felt those memories calling to him. He whispered into the quiet air, "I want to understand, Dad. "I'm ready now." The wind moved gently, almost like a response. Ethan stayed outside until the first stars appeared. He didn't know exactly what tomorrow would bring, but he knew one thing clearly. He couldn't run from the land anymore. The truth was no longer something to fear. It was something to face. The land had remembered. Now Ethan finally remembered too. And that changed everything. The storm arrived without warning. One moment the sky over the ranch was clear and pale blue, and the next a thick gray cloud rolled in from the west, heavy with lightning. Ethan stood near the fence line, studying the map he had found in the tin box. The air had been warm when he stepped outside, but now a sudden chill swept across the land. He looked up, confused by how fast the weather had changed. A strong wind pushed across the fields, bending the tall grass. The smell of rain mixed with something sharper, something that made Ethan's stomach tighten. He knew that smell too well. It was the scent of dry earth warming just before lightning struck. The first bolt hit somewhere beyond the far hill. It lit up the sky for a second and echoed across the ground like a deep drum. Ethan stared in that direction, waiting for another flash. When it came, it hit closer, and that sharp smell grew stronger. Then he saw it. A rising thread of smoke curled lazily upward from the far end of the property. At first, it was small, just a thin line against the clouds, but Ethan felt his heartbeat quicken. He knew how fast smoke became flames. He knew how fast flames became danger. He didn't think twice. He dropped the map, grabbed the old fire tools his father kept in the barn, and jumped onto his truck. The engine roared to life as he drove across the uneven field, bouncing over old mounds of dirt and dried roots. The whole time, his chest grew tighter. He didn't want to relive the past, but the past was already waiting for him at the smoke source. When he reached the hill's edge, he saw the grass fire clearly. A lightning strike had hit a dry patch, and small flames danced across the brown grass. They weren't big yet, but Ethan could tell the wind wanted to help them grow. The fire crackled softly, almost gently, but he knew that gentleness was a lie. He jumped out of the truck, grabbed a shovel, and ran toward the flames. The heat hit his face immediately, reminding him too much of the wildfire from years ago. For a moment, his mind froze. He saw his younger self stumbling beside a huge wall of fire, calling for his father. He remembered coughing, panicking, running blindly, but now he wasn't a boy. And he wasn't running. He forced himself to breathe slowly, grounding his mind. He studied the wind direction, remembered what his father once taught him. Fight a fire from the sides, not the front. He began digging a thin trench around the burning area, hoping to stop the flames from moving outward. Sparks drifted toward dry patches, but he stomped them out quickly. His arms burned with effort, but he didn't stop. Sweat rolled down his face, mixing with dust. The heat grew stronger, and the fire hissed as it touched new grass. The wind shifted once, pushing the flames toward him. Ethan stumbled back, coughing in the smoke, but he steadied himself. He kept working, forcing his fear to stay behind him. Minutes felt like hours, but slowly, carefully, he controlled the fire's growth. He beat the flames with the fire blanket he had brought, smothering small patches and kicking dirt over glowing embers. His muscles shook, but he kept going. He didn't think about selling the ranch. He didn't think about debt. He didn't think about the mistakes from the past. All he thought about was protecting the land that had carried his father's footsteps, his childhood memories, and now, his truth. The fire finally slowed. The flames weakened, turning into soft orange glows, then into dull smoke. Ethan stomped on the last small ember and breathed deeply, his chest rising and falling with exhaustion. The storm clouds began to break apart, leaving the sky dim but calm. A light drizzle fell, helping cool the burned patch of land. Ethan dropped to his knees, his arms trembling, his clothes covered in dirt and sweat. He was too tired to stand, so he let his body sink into the warm ashes. The ground was still warm beneath him, but not dangerously hot. It felt strange, comforting, almost as if the land was offering him a quiet place to rest. Ethan placed his hands on the ground and closed his eyes. His heart still raced, but slowly, a soft wave of relief washed over him. He had faced the fire. And this time, he hadn't caused it. He had stopped it. A soft voice approached from behind him. "You listened," Mara said. Ethan didn't lift his head at first. He simply breathed slowly, letting the moment settle inside him. When he finally looked up, Mara stood a few steps away, watching him with calm eyes. Her shawl was damp from the drizzle, but she didn't seem bothered. "You listened to the land," she continued gently. "It told you what to do." Ethan shook his head weakly. "I just reacted." "No," Mara said. "You acted with understanding. That is different." She stepped closer and looked at the burned area. "Your father would be proud. You faced what once frightened you, and you protected the land instead of fearing it." Ethan looked down at his hands, still trembling. "I thought I was going to freeze when I saw the flames. I remembered everything. But I didn't run." "That is courage," Mara said. "Not the absence of fear, but action in the middle of fear." Ethan let out a shaky breath. "Do you really think the land remembers all this? That it knows what happened back then?" Mara sat beside him carefully, her old knees bending slowly. "The land remembers because people forget. But today, it remembers something new. It remembers what you did." Ethan studied the burned ground. The fire was small compared to the wildfire he had caused years ago, but its meaning was larger. It had shown him who he had become. "I don't want to forget anymore," he said finally. "I don't want to pretend the past didn't happen." Mara smiled softly. "Then you are ready to rebuild." The drizzle stopped, and the clouds lifted, letting a faint glow of sunlight fall across the field. Ethan remained on his knees in the ashes, feeling a mix of exhaustion and peace. For the first time in years, he felt connected to the land instead of separated from it. He felt part of something old and important, something his father had tried to teach him but he had ignored. He wasn't sure what the future looked like. The ranch still needed repairs. The debts still existed. The offer from the development company still lingered. But none of those thoughts felt heavy right now. Right now, he only felt the quiet strength of the land beneath him. Mara stood slowly and looked at him with approval. "This land will heal," she said. "And so will you." Ethan looked out at the fields, the barn, the horizon stretching endlessly. He knew he had more to face, more to understand, more to rebuild. But the fear he once felt of memories, of fire, of failure was no longer controlling him. He had faced the flames. He had not run. And that changed everything. As he stood up, brushing ash from his hands, he whispered softly, "Thank you, Dad." The land didn't answer out loud, but deep inside, Ethan felt it listening. Ethan woke up the next morning with a different feeling in his chest. It wasn't fear, and it wasn't guilt. It was something he hadn't felt in many years, a quiet sense of direction. His body was sore from fighting the grass fire, but the soreness reminded him of strength, not weakness. He stepped outside and looked toward the hill where the fire had burned. The ground there was still dark, but small birds were already hopping near it, pecking at the wet soil. Nature was beginning to heal, just as Mara said it would. He took a deep breath and walked across the yard. The air felt lighter today, as if the land itself had loosened a weight that had been sitting on both of them. Ethan didn't rush. He moved slowly, observing everything: the fences, the barn, the fields, the sky. For the first time since returning, he didn't see the ranch as a reminder of failure. Instead, he saw possibility. Inside the house, the tin box still sat on the kitchen table. Ethan opened it again, gently touching the map and the burned letter. The unfinished words still bothered him, but they no longer scared him. Instead, he felt comfort knowing that his father had wanted him to understand something important. Even though the full message was lost, the meaning felt clearer now. His father believed he would come back. His father believed he would face the truth. He folded the letter carefully and placed it aside. Then he took the photograph of the two of them standing near the barn. He studied his father's face, the calm eyes, the proud smile. Ethan remembered the sound of his father's laugh, the strength in his hands, the way he always stayed calm during storms. For years, Ethan thought he had disappointed him. But now, he saw things differently. His father hadn't kept the truth from him out of blame. He had kept it out of love. Ethan whispered, "I'm home now." The room felt warmer, as if it hurt him. Later that morning, he walked to the barn with a hammer and a toolbox. He ran his fingers along the cracked wood, imagining how his father once repaired this place after storms or long winters. Ethan tapped loose nails back into the beams and replaced a broken board on the door. The work was slow, but it felt peaceful. It felt right. While he worked, Mara appeared again, walking slowly along the dirt path that led to the barn. Ethan didn't feel surprised to see her anymore. She had become part of the land itself, always appearing when something important was happening. "You've been busy," she said. "Trying to fix what I can," Ethan replied. He pushed hair out of his face and smiled lightly. "It feels different today. The ranch. It feels alive again." Mara's eyes softened. "It feels your choice." Ethan paused. "My choice?" "Yes," she said. "For the first time, you are choosing to stay, not because you have to, not because of debt, not because of guilt, but because this land holds your story. And you finally want to hear it." Ethan thought about that. She was right. Yesterday, when he fought the fire, he wasn't thinking about selling. He wasn't running from memories. He was protecting something he cared about. "I don't want to sell it," he said finally. Saying it out loud felt like lifting a heavy stone from his heart. "I'm going to keep the ranch." Mara nodded once, as if she had been waiting for those words. "Good. Then the land will walk with you." Before Ethan could reply, the sound of a vehicle approached. He turned and saw Daniel, the man from the development company, stepping out of his shiny truck. His polished shoes looked out of place on the dusty ground. "Ethan," Daniel called with a friendly smile. "Have you had time to think about our offer? Have you had time to think about our offer?" Ethan wiped his hands on his jeans. "I have." Daniel's smile grew wider. "Great. We can raise the price if needed. This land is valuable to us." Ethan looked around at the fields, the barn, the fences he had inherited from his father. He thought about the fire last night and how his father had once stood in these same places, facing his own struggles. Then he looked at Daniel and said firmly, "I'm not selling." Daniel blinked, surprised. "Are you sure? You could walk away with enough money to start fresh anywhere. You don't have to stay here." "I know," Ethan said. "But I want to stay. This land is part of my life. It's part of my family. I'm not giving it up." Daniel's expression fell, but he nodded politely. "I respect your decision. If you change your mind." "I won't," Ethan said gently but firmly. With that, Daniel shook his hand and left. When the truck disappeared down the road, Ethan felt a deep sense of peace. He had chosen something with his whole heart, for the first time in years. For the rest of the day, he worked on the ranch. He fixed fence posts, cleaned the old chicken coop, and gathered broken boards to use for future repairs. His body was tired, but his spirit felt light. Even the sun seemed brighter, giving the ranch a warm golden glow. In the afternoon, Ethan walked to the burned patch of land where he fought the fire. The ashes were cool now, and the marks looked softer, but something new caught his eye, tiny green shoots pushing up from the soil. Fresh life, new beginnings. He felt a small smile form. "This land doesn't give up easily," he whispered. When he returned to the house before sunset, he brought the tin box with him. He placed fresh paper and a pen inside, alongside the old letter. Then he wrote a few words of his own, not to explain the past, but to honor it. "I remember, and I'm staying." He closed the box and placed it in a dry, safe corner of the house. One day, maybe someone else would find it. Maybe they would read his words and understand the story the land carried. As the sun lowered behind the hills, Ethan walked outside and looked across the ranch. The sky glowed orange and pink. The air was still. He felt his father's presence in the gentle wind, in the whisper of grass, In the quietness of the evening, Mara stood far down the road, watching him. She didn't wave or call out. She simply nodded once, a gesture of respect, pride, and farewell. Ethan nodded back. He understood her message without words. He wasn't a visitor anymore. He wasn't running anymore. The ranch was his again, heart, soul, and memory. He walked back toward the house with slow, steady steps. For the first time in years, he didn't feel alone. He felt connected to the land, to his father, to the past that shaped him, and to the future he was ready to build. And as night fell gently over the ranch, Ethan whispered into the quiet air, "I'm home." The land, silent and patient, seemed to breathe with him.